Sean and David and even Patrick, they got the worst of him. Ryan got the best of him.
What happens when the picture-perfect family America thought they knew hides a reality no one wanted to believe? At 92 years old, Shirley Jones, the Academy Award winner and television legend, has finally chosen to reveal the truth. For decades, the public saw her as the wholesome mother, the loyal wife, the smiling matriarch of a musical dynasty. But behind closed doors, her family life was marked by tension, fractured relationships, and choices that carried painful consequences. She now admits that the cost of fame reached into her home in ways fans never imagined. Why did her marriage end the way it did? What secrets weighed on her children for years? And what is the truth she has carried in silence until now? The answers may change the way you remember her forever. On screen, Shirley Jones was the symbol of stability. She was the Oscar-winning actress who later became television's perfect mother. Audiences trusted her smile and warmth, believing her life was as steady as her roles. But she admits the truth at home was far more complicated. Shirley was raised in a strict Pennsylvania household, built on discipline, church on Sundays, and protecting the family name. She carried those lessons into her own home, expecting her children to respect rules and behave in ways that reflected the family's image. But raising children in Hollywood was a battle she never felt prepared for. The attention never stopped. At the store, at school events, even on vacation, she and her children were being watched. Any misstep risked headlines. She feared the line between her professional image and private life collapsing at any moment. Balancing work and motherhood left her exhausted. She filmed long hours, then came home to cook, help with homework, and enforce order. She admits now the balance was fragile, and often she felt she was failing both roles. Behind the mask of control were arguments with her husband, discipline struggles with the boys, and nights when she cried alone. Loneliness, more than fame, defined her early years as a mother. Her sons grew resentful as they aged. Teachers, friends, and fans compared Shirley to her television characters, assuming the household matched her on-screen life. The boys knew differently: tempers, their father's instability, and the weight of constant scrutiny. She tried to hold the family together, setting curfews, demanding church attendance, grounding them when needed. But the cracks were showing. Jack Cassidys' behavior and risks seeped into the home, and Shirley could no longer shield the children. Silence became her survival strategy. Speaking honestly, she feared, would destroy her career and embarrass her family. So she smiled for cameras and tucked her children into bed, knowing the first fracture inside her family had already begun. When Shirley Jones talks about Jack Cassidy, there's always a pause. She calls him one of the most magnetic men she ever knew. To the public, he was handsome and endlessly charming. To her, he was also restless, unpredictable, and at times destructive. Their marriage began like a dream, but behind the glamour was a relationship that often felt like walking a tightrope. They met when Shirley was in her early 20s. She had already won an Academy Award, and he was a rising Broadway star. He swept her into a life of music, parties, and constant movement. Friends described them as dazzling together, but Shirley says she saw early signs: mood swings, late nights, and an energy that turned quickly from excitement to anger. At first, she ignored the doubts. She was young, in love, and believed marriage and children would settle Jack. They wed in 1956 and soon had 3 boys: Sean, Patrick, and Ryan. For a while, she thought family life grounded him, but as her career rose and his career wavered, Jack chased excitement, affairs, reckless spending, and the nightlife of Hollywood and New York. The marriage became a cycle. Jack would charm her, then disappear into behaviors that left her betrayed and alone. The children noticed. Raised voices, slammed doors, and long absences marked their childhood. Shirley tried to hold the family together, but began to wonder if leaving might do less harm than staying. As her fame grew, Jack resented being in her shadow. His need to prove himself led to turmoil at home. She struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the man her children were beginning to fear. The breaking point came when his affairs hit the press, and his temper grew worse. She worried most about the boys. They adored their father, but they were also absorbing his instability. Deep down, she knew the cycle would never end. In the early 1970s, Shirley chose to separate. Divorce carried stigma, but she believed staying would cause more damage. She has said she didn't leave because she stopped loving Jack. She left to protect her children. That decision reshaped the family, leading to strained co-parenting and confusion for the boys. Looking back, Shirley says she learned a hard truth. Charm and passion can only carry a marriage so far. Without trust and stability, even the strongest attraction collapses. She loved Jack, but she could not ignore the cost of his choices, and that cost would become clearer than ever on a single night in December 1976. December 12, 1976. That was the night everything changed. Jack Cassidy was alone in his West Hollywood apartment. He had spent the evening out, and when he returned, no one knows exactly what happened. Hours later, a fire tore through the building. Jack never made it out. He was just 49. For Shirley, the news came in fragments. First a call, then confirmation from authorities, and finally the headline she dreaded. Even though they had divorced, he was still the father of her children. Her first thought was not about herself. It was about how she would tell the boys. Sean, Patrick, and Ryan were old enough to understand the finality of death. Shirley has said no acting role ever prepared her for that moment. She chose her words carefully. She gathered them together and explained their father was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she had experienced. The boys didn't just lose a father. They lost the hope of reconciliation, of ever hearing him explain himself again. The public response was overwhelming. Headlines remembered Jack as a star, but at home, Shirley was managing grief and guilt. She wondered if leaving the marriage had somehow led to this ending. She knew logically it wasn't her fault, but emotionally, she carried that weight. Privately, each boy reacted differently. Sean tried to stay strong, Patrick withdrew, and Ryan became more sensitive. They weren't just mourning their father, they were haunted by the way he died. Alone, no goodbye. It left scars that shaped their teenage years. Shirley also faced public expectation. Reporters asked her to comment, but behind closed doors, she admitted to friends she was terrified for her children's future. Would they repeat Jack's mistakes? Could she keep them steady alone? These questions kept her awake at night. Over time, Shirley shared more about that night. She revealed how the boys carried anger, not just at Jack, but at the world that celebrated him without acknowledging the pain he caused at home. And she admitted that even decades later, part of her still replays the choices she made. Jack's death closed one chapter and opened another. Shirley had to step fully into the role of protector and guide for her sons. Every decision, every rule, every lesson now fell on her shoulders. But the hardest relationship to navigate wasn't with her sons. It was with Jack's other child. When Shirley Jones married Jack Cassidy, she didn't just become a wife, she also became a stepmother. Jack already had a son from his previous marriage to Evelyn Ward. His name was David. At the time, David was just a boy. Over the years, he would become one of the biggest teen idols in the world. But long before the posters and the screaming fans, David was a child trying to find his place in a blended family. Shirley has said many times that she cared for David as if he were her own. He lived with her and Jack for long stretches of his childhood, and she tried to make sure he felt included. She set the same rules for him as she did for her own sons. Homework, chores, respect at the dinner table. But there was always an awareness that David had another mother, and that meant boundaries. Shirley admits it was never easy knowing how much to step in and how much to step back. As David grew older, the family dynamic grew more complicated. He was close in age to Sean, and the two often felt like brothers. They played together, fought like siblings, and sometimes even competed for Jack's attention. But while Sean and his brothers grew up in the shadow of Shirley's fame, David's life was shaped by Jack's inconsistencies and his own struggles to find identity in two households. Shirley recalls that David often seemed unsettled, caught between loyalty to his mother, respect for his father, and the rules of her household. Then came the fame. In the early 1970s, David Cassidy became a global superstar through his role on the Partridge Family. Ironically, the show also starred Shirley as his on-screen mother. To millions of fans, they looked like the ultimate happy family. But behind the cameras, their relationship was layered with tension. Shirley admits she was proud of David's talent, but she also saw the strain the fame put on him. Concert tours, endless press, and screaming fans left him exhausted and at times deeply unhappy. She worried about him, but she also had to protect her own sons, who were growing up in the shadow of their stepbrother's meteoric rise. Public perception only made things harder. Fans assumed Shirley and David had a warm, unshakable bond. They imagined she guided him as both a mother and and mentor. The reality, as she later explained, was more distant. While she loved him, their relationship never became as close as outsiders believed. There were unspoken walls, shaped by his loyalty to his biological mother and by Jack's unpredictable presence. She tried to be supportive, but she knew David carried struggles she couldn't solve. The years following Jack's death in 1976 made everything more complicated. Without Jack as the link, Shirley and David had to redefine what they meant to each other. Some interactions were warm, others strained. She has admitted that grief brought them together in some moments, but distance grew in others. She respected his talent and wished him happiness, but she often felt like a guest in his life rather than a central figure. What Shirley emphasizes now is that the public never saw the private reality. She wasn't the guiding stepmother fans assumed. She was a presence in David's life, yes, but never the anchor he may have needed. Their relationship was shaped by boundaries, distance, and the fallout of Jack's choices. Shirley says she carries no bitterness about that. Instead, she looks back with understanding. David's path was difficult, and it was never her role to replace his mother. Still, there were moments of connection, quiet conversations, family gatherings, times when she saw a softer side of him away from the spotlight. She treasures those moments, even if they were rare, because years later, when David faced his own crisis, those fragile ties between them would be tested in ways neither of them expected. After Jack's death, Shirley Jones faced the challenge of raising 3 boys on her own. Sean, Patrick, and Ryan were no longer just children in a Hollywood household. They were young men growing up under the glare of public attention, and each one would experience that spotlight in very different ways. Sean was the first to step directly into fame. In the mid-1970s, his career exploded. Television roles, hit songs, and packed concerts made him a star in his own right. For Shirley, this was both a point of pride and a source of worry. She had seen what fame had done to Jack, and she feared Sean might follow the same dangerous path. At home, she enforced rules: school first, no special treatment, and respect for family time. But the outside world didn't always respect those boundaries. Everywhere they went, people recognized Sean, and the line between family life and public life blurred. Patrick's experience was different. While his brother was chased by fans, Patrick leaned toward more private ambitions. He enjoyed acting, but didn't crave the same level of attention. Shirley recalls him being more reserved, more cautious about fame. She admired that, but it also created tension. In a household where one brother was the center of attention, the others sometimes felt invisible. Shirley admits she struggled to balance the spotlight, to make sure Patrick and Ryan felt equally valued, even when the press focused only on Sean. Ryan, the youngest, had the hardest time adjusting. He was still in school when his brothers' careers took off, and he often felt left behind. Shirley has said that Ryan carried resentment toward the media, toward the constant comparisons, and sometimes even toward his own family. He wanted a normal childhood, but that was nearly impossible when reporters called the house, photographers waited outside, and fans treated their family like public property. Inside the home, Shirley worked to create stability. She insisted on family dinners, curfews, and accountability. She made sure her sons understood that fame did not excuse bad behavior, but she also admits that enforcing discipline was exhausting. Each boy had his own personality, his own needs, and his own response to the loss of their father. Some nights ended in arguments, others ended in silence, and as the boys became teenagers, the pressures only grew stronger. Shirley later revealed what she calls her biggest regret, not recognizing sooner how fame shaped their sibling relationship. Sean's success changed the family dynamic. It brought money, opportunities, and attention, but it also brought jealousy, competition, and stress. Shirley now says she wishes she had spoken more openly about it with her sons. Instead, she focused on keeping order, believing that structure would solve the tension. But she realizes now that unspoken emotions often linger longer than spoken ones. Still, Shirley was determined to protect them from the darker side of Hollywood. She monitored the parties they attended, limited who they associated with, and reminded them of their responsibility to the family name. She saw firsthand how young stars were consumed by drugs, scandals, and financial ruin. She wanted her boys to avoid that fate. Some listened, some resisted, and some carried scars anyway. Then came a decision that split the household. Shirley remarried in 1977, just months after Jack's death. Her new husband, Marty Ingalls, brought his own energy and chaos into the family. To Shirley, it was a second chance at partnership. To her sons, it was a disruption they weren't ready for. In 1977, 1977, less than a year after Jack Cassidys' death, Shirley Jones surprised her family by marrying again. Her new husband was Marty Ingalls, a comedian and actor with a reputation for being eccentric, outspoken, and unpredictable. For Shirley, Marty was a breath of fresh air. He made her laugh at a time when her life felt heavy with grief. But for her children, Marty was something else entirely, an intrusion into a fragile family still adjusting to loss. Shirley admitted she didn't expect the backlash. To her, the marriage was a lifeline. She had spent years carrying the weight of Jack's behavior, and then the pain of his death. Marty was the first man who treated her with the devotion she had always wanted. He was loud, unconventional, but he adored her. For Shirley, that was enough. For her sons, it was not. Sean, Patrick, and Ryan were teenagers when Marty entered their lives, and they weren't ready to accept him. Some saw him as a distraction, others as a rival for their mother's attention. Family dinners that were once tense became battlegrounds. Marty had a sharp tongue and a comedian's instinct to provoke. What seemed like harmless banter to him often felt like disrespect to the boys. Shirley tried to keep the peace, caught between loyalty to her new husband and loyalty to her sons. The press didn't make things easier. Marty's personality drew headlines, sometimes at Shirley's expense. He loved to speak publicly, occasionally embarrassing her children. Fans who had once seen Shirley as untouchable now had opinions about her marriage. And while Shirley stood by him, she admitted his behavior could be exhausting. Their love was real, but not simple. Inside the house, divisions grew sharper. The boys resented Marty's role in decisions. Shirley believed he deserved respect as her husband. This tug-of-war played out daily, over school choices, finances, even who sat where at the dinner table. Yet Shirley also saw qualities in Marty others missed. He was protective, handled her business affairs, and stood up for her in ways Jack never had. To Shirley, Marty represented stability, even if messy, but she couldn't ignore the strain it put on her relationship with her sons. Over the years, the family learned to coexist, though not without scars. Marty's relationship with the boys remained complicated. Some days laughter, other days arguments. Shirley reassured her children Marty didn't replace their father. Still, she admitted later the marriage created distance she never fully healed. The turning point came when Marty's health declined. The man who had once been a source of conflict became someone the family rallied around. Shirley's sons saw her devotion, and slowly, some of the tension faded. They might not have loved him the way she did, but they respected her choice. And in that respect, a fragile peace formed. But Shirley's family journey didn't settle there. In the decades that followed, more losses and revelations would reopen wounds she thought had healed. And one of the deepest would come when David Cassidy, her stepson, and once her on-screen son, faced his final years. By the time Shirley Jones entered her later years, she had endured more than her share of loss. She had buried her first husband, seen her second husband's health decline, and watched her children struggle with the pressures of fame. But one of the hardest chapters of her family story came with David Cassidy's final years. David had lived his life in the public eye, from the screaming fans of the Partridge Family era to the relentless press that followed him into adulthood. For Shirley, being both his stepmother and his former television mother blurred the line between family and work. She wanted to be supportive, but David's path was marked by personal battles, struggles with alcohol, financial troubles, and health problems that grew worse with time. Shirley admitted that she often felt helpless. She had seen how fame consumed people, and she feared David was one of its casualties. When news broke in the 2000s that he had been arrested for multiple DUIs, Shirley felt both heartbreak and frustration. She believed he had more talent than most people in Hollywood, yet she watched him undermine himself. Privately, she hoped her sons would learn from his mistakes. Publicly, she stayed quiet, unwilling to add to his humiliation. But David's health began to deteriorate. In 2017, he revealed he was suffering from dementia, a diagnosis that shocked the public. Shirley later said the news didn't surprise her entirely. She had seen changes in his behavior, moments of confusion, and signs that something was wrong. Still, hearing it confirmed hit her hard. This was the boy she had helped raise, the man she had worked with, and the stepson who had lived under her roof. Now he was fading before the world's eyes. The most painful part for Shirley was hearing David admit publicly that his relationship with her and her sons had never been what fans imagined. He confessed in interviews that he felt distant from them, that fame had complicated everything, and that old wounds never fully healed. Shirley didn't deny it. She acknowledged that their connection had always been complicated, shaped by divided loyalties and Jack's influence. Still, she hoped for reconciliation humiliation in his final years. When David passed away in November 2017, at just 67 years old, Shirley felt a deep mix of grief and regret. She mourned not only the man he was, but also the relationship they never fully had. She admitted to friends that she wished she had told him more often that she loved him, even if the bond was imperfect. She also wished her own children could have known him without the cloud of fame and resentment that followed him everywhere. David's death reopened old wounds for the family. It reminded them of Jack, of the fire, of the instability that had defined their early years. It also forced Shirley to confront what she calls the limits of love. She has said that you can love someone deeply, but you cannot save them if they don't want to be saved. That realization was one of the most painful of her life. In her later interviews, Shirley spoke candidly about David's struggles. She didn't hide from the truth, but she framed it with compassion. She urged families of famous children to pay attention, to set boundaries, and to remember that talent and success mean nothing if the person is breaking inside. It was her way of turning personal tragedy into a lesson for others. But sharing those lessons came at a cost. It meant finally admitting out loud the things she had avoided for decades, the fractures in her family, the choices she regretted, and the truth about the cost of her life in the spotlight.